2 years ago, my parents sat me down and told me it was time to start becoming independent. I had just turned 18 and was about to start college. They explained how important it was for me to learn the value of money and independence. They wanted me to fund my own college tuition and manage things on my own. They did say they'd support me occasionally if I really needed it, but they made it clear that they preferred I learn to live life on my own. To put it bluntly, they pretty much showed me the door as soon as I turned 18. It was unexpected, especially since my relationship with them had always been fine, but I didn't argue. I figured it would be good for me to learn how to handle things by myself, so I agreed to their terms and started thinking of ways to pay for college. Thankfully, I had saved some money from part-time jobs over the past few years, so I wasn't too worried. After getting accepted into my chosen college, I decided to work while studying to cover my tuition and other expenses. That's how I've managed to pay my way for the past 2 years. It hasn't been easy. I'm exhausted after classes, and then I have to work, which doesn't pay much. I live frugally, and it's often overwhelming. Sometimes I ask my parents for help with small expenses, but I try to avoid it as much as possible, because I keep thinking about how they emphasized the importance of independence when I turned 18. Recently, though, I started questioning whether they really meant it or if it was just a way to avoid paying for my college. My younger sister, who just turned 18, is about to start college too. I assumed my parents would take the same approach with her as they did with me. But a few days ago, she called to tell me that our parents had actually offered to cover all her college expenses. She was shocked, and so was I. Our parents had always said they weren't financially well off enough to send both of us to college and cover all our expenses. They told me I needed to be independent, so I figured they'd do the same with my sister. But this sudden change was confusing. My sister was confused too and talked to our parents, but they just told her not to worry about it. After our conversation, my sister suggested I talk to our parents directly, so I called my mum right away. I didn't waste any time and got straight to the point, asking why they offered to pay for all my sister's college tuition and expenses while they had encouraged me to be independent and cover my own costs. I was pretty angry because, to be honest, I wasn't having an easy time. Balancing work and school was tough, my GPA was suffering, and I was still struggling with money. It felt incredibly unfair that they were willing to support my sister completely while leaving me to fend for myself. When I confronted my mum, she put me on speaker so my dad could join the conversation. They started giving excuses, saying that they initially thought they couldn't afford to send both of us to college, but later realized they could, which is why they offered to pay for my sister. They didn't think I'd take it personally, but I wasn't buying that. My mum's an accountant. There's no way she couldn't have known their financial situation. It felt like something they had planned all along, and I wanted to get to the bottom of it. After a lot of back and forth, they finally admitted that they chose to pay for my sister because they thought she was a better student and a safer bet. I didn't know how to respond to that. Even though it was true, it hurt a lot to hear them say I wasn't worth spending money on. Sure, my sister might be better academically, but I wasn't terrible. I might have been average in school, but for them to decide I didn't deserve a comfortable life or a chance at college was incredibly painful. I don't want to sound entitled, but it felt like they were treating me unfairly, and worse, they had lied to me. If they had been honest from the beginning, I might have respected their decision, even if it hurt. Instead, they manipulated me into thinking that they wanted me to be independent when, in reality, they just wanted a way out of paying for my education. After they explained themselves, they tried to tell me they really did want the best for me, but weren't sure if it would be worth it. It felt like they were rubbing salt in the wound. They claimed they thought my sister might choose an expensive college due to her great grades, so they needed to be prepared for that and wanted me to work my way through school to support her. They said they didn't want to hurt my feelings by telling me the truth earlier, but that was pointless because now that I knew, I was hurt anyway. Honestly, if they had just been upfront from the start, I might not have been as hurt as I am now. I didn't say anything and just hung up abruptly because, after what they said, I lost all interest in talking to them. I then texted my sister to let her know what I had learned.
We're pretty close, so she deserved to know. She was shocked and told me she wouldn't accept any money from them, but I convinced her to let them pay for her tuition. She's a bright student and deserves the support, so I urged her to go to the college of her choice. I also told her that I wouldn't be keeping in touch with our parents for a while because of how hurtful their actions were. With Thanksgiving and Christmas break coming up in a few weeks, I had planned to go home, but now that's not going to happen. I didn't say anything else, but I guess my sister must have told our parents that I wouldn't be coming home for the holidays. I wasn't sure where I'd go. Probably stay with my grandparents. But I knew I didn't want to see my parents. Unfortunately, my sister mentioned it to them, and now things have gotten really ugly. The day after that conversation, she told me our parents had been fighting since she told them I wouldn't be coming home. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but they were so loud that she couldn't help but hear. Apparently it was mostly my mom's idea to make me pay for my own tuition. She had convinced my dad to go along with it, arguing that they needed to save money for my sister in case she chose to go to college in another country, which seemed likely given her grades and love for travel. Now that I had learned the truth and decided to cut ties, my dad was more upset about it than anyone else. He was blaming my mom, saying it was all her fault since she had manipulated him into agreeing. He was upset that their decision had alienated me to the point where I didn't even want to come home for the holidays. Even though I'm angry at both my parents, I don't think it's fair for my dad to put all the blame on my mom. He was just as much a part of this. My sister said they had been fighting relentlessly, and my dad even threatened to leave my mom if she didn't convince me to come back home. My sister just wanted to give me a heads up that my mom might reach out to me, and I'm glad she did. After thinking it over, I realized that their fighting and being upset wasn't my problem. I was already dealing with enough on my own and couldn't take on their marital issues too. I decided I wasn't going home for the holidays, no matter what my mom said. With that mindset, I answered her call yesterday, knowing that whatever she said, I wasn't going back. If my dad actually decided to leave her over this, that was their issue, not mine. Just like they had told me to handle my money problems independently, I figured they should deal with their problems on their own. It seemed only fair. But during the conversation, my mom started accusing me of being heartless, saying I was making a big deal out of nothing. She claimed I wasn't entitled to their money anyway, so I was acting spoiled by thinking they had wronged me by not paying for my college. That really stung, because it wasn't about the money. It was about how they treated me differently from my sister, and tried to manipulate me into thinking it was for my own good. If they hadn't gone on about the importance of independence, I might have taken out a student loan and handled things more easily, but I didn't because I needed them as co-signers, and that didn't feel independent. My mom, however, said the only reason she treated us differently was because our grades were so different, which I found even more offensive. Sure, my sister has always been a straight A student, and I'm happy for her, but I'm not a terrible student either. I've always been good at the major I chose, and I think my parents should have considered that before doing something so manipulative and hurtful. My mom and I argued for almost 15 minutes, but we didn't reach any resolution. I told her firmly that I wasn't coming home for the holidays, and that was final. They had messed up big time, and I didn't even want to see them right now. My mom thinks I'm being unreasonable and need to grow up instead of being petty, while I think she's being manipulative again, so we're at a deadlock. I feel bad because I don't want my parents to get divorced, even though I'm not sure if my dad will actually leave her over this. They've had bad fights before, but he's never said anything like this, so it scares me. They've been together since high school, so for him to say he might leave is a big deal. Am I the jerk for not wanting to go home after finding out they offered to pay for my sister's tuition, after refusing to do the same for me? Update. Thanks for all the comments on my original post. It's been 3 days since I spoke to my mom, and things have been weird. I've kept in touch with my sister, and she keeps telling me not to worry about it because she knows I'm struggling. I decided to quit my job because I realized it was holding me back. I was splitting my time between work and trying to study extra hard, and I didn't even notice how consumed I had become. I had no time left for the things I enjoyed, and for the past couple of years, I was living like a zombie. I've been so stressed that I haven't gone out with my friends in weeks. But I decided to go out this weekend, and my friends were surprised since I usually just stayed cooped up in my room, especially since I work from home. Now, I've decided to live a little. I also spoke to my grandparents on my dad's side about everything. After a brief discussion, they offered to help me financially, whether I needed a loan or any other support. Since there's just a little time left before I graduate, I decided to accept their help. So, my grandparents are going to cover me for these last few months. I also have some of my own savings, so I'm not really worried about money anymore. They even offered me a place to stay during the holidays, since I don't want to live with my parents right now. They were shocked when they learned the real reason my parents didn't cover my college tuition. My grandpa had offered to help me before, but I turned it down because I wanted to be independent. Now, I regret that decision, as I lost so much trying to be independent just because my parents pushed me into it. I feel like I was a fool to fall for it. Update. It's been a week since I last spoke to my mom. Today, since I wasn't replying to her messages or answering her calls, she decided to show up at my college. I wasn't expecting that. Her last few messages said I needed to talk to my dad because he was really upset, and she kept insisting that she and my dad love both of us equally and didn't mean to treat me unfairly. They were just trying to do what they thought was practical. But that didn't make any difference to me. I was angry with both of them and didn't want to speak to either one, so I had been ignoring her. But today, when she showed up, I couldn't just ignore her. She called me a bunch of times, and I didn't pick up, but then she texted me saying I needed to come see her because she had driven all the way out to my college specifically to talk to me, and she wasn't leaving without doing so. I tried to tell her I didn't want to speak to her right now because I wasn't in the right state of mind, but she refused to leave. Eventually, I had to go meet her. We decided to go to the nearby Wendy's to talk because I didn't want anyone from my college to see us if we ended up arguing. Since it was evening, I figured Wendy's would be pretty empty, so it seemed like a safe place to have the conversation. When we got there, she ordered food for me, even though I kept insisting I wasn't hungry. She said she wanted to make it up to me and ended up getting a lot of things for me to eat. Then we finally started talking. Or rather, she started explaining herself. She apologized for the way she had treated me, and admitted there was no excuse for it. She told me she had been trying to justify everything, both to me and to herself, but she realized now that she was wrong. She asked me to forgive her and consider coming back home for the holidays because we clearly had a lot to talk about. I told her that I had already spoken to my grandparents, and they had offered to let me stay with them during the holidays. I said I could meet her halfway. Maybe I'd stay with them for a couple of days if I felt like it, but I really needed some time away. She seemed a bit upset by that, but she accepted it, knowing it was the best she was going to get from me. Then she mentioned that my sister had been accepted into some great colleges, but had been saying she didn't want our parents' help, which made me feel bad because I knew she was doing it for me. I reassured my mom that I would make sure my sister accepted their help. I love my sister and don't want her to go through the same struggles I did. Honestly, being independent and paying your way through college isn't all it's cracked up to be. I know this might sound spoiled, but if I'm being honest, I would have preferred to have parents who paid for everything until I had a job of my own. People with parents who can afford to spend thousands on them really do have it easier, and it's just practical. We fool ourselves if we think we're better off just because we're independent. Anyway, I reassured my mom that I'd make sure my sister accepted their help, because if she tried to work while studying, she'd struggle, and I didn't want her grades to suffer like mine did. I couldn't resist asking how things were between her and my dad, since I'd last heard he was threatening to leave her. My mom seemed a bit surprised by the question, but she told me things were okay. They had decided to go to marriage counseling because they'd been fighting a lot recently, mostly about my situation. Surprisingly, my dad hadn't tried to contact me since our last conversation, where I found out why they didn't pay for my tuition. When I asked my mom about it, she explained that he had been extremely upset and wanted to reach out but kept second-guessing himself and couldn't bring himself to do it. She had encouraged him to text me, but he kept overthinking it. My mom actually had tears in her eyes while talking about this, and I felt awful because my dad isn't usually emotional. I knew things must be really bad for him to be acting this way. Hearing this, I did something impulsive and told my mom to put him on the phone right then. She was surprised, but I told her I just wanted to talk to him. I wasn't expecting an apology or anything. I just wanted to talk to my dad because I really missed our conversations. Before all the tension, we used to talk every other day. I was always closer to him, so I'm not surprised he stood up for me this time. I know both my parents messed up, but they're still my parents, and I'm willing to forgive them and work through this. It might not be a decision everyone agrees with, but it's mine. Anyway, while we were sitting together, my mom called my dad, and he picked up right away. He wasn't on speaker yet, but the first thing he asked was if I was okay, which made me pretty emotional. I didn't let my mom answer. I told him I was fine and wanted to talk to him. I took the phone from her, and he was quiet for a bit, so I told him I was still processing everything. I didn't know if I'd forgiven them yet, but I wanted to work through it. I told him that if he kept second-guessing himself, we wouldn't be able to sort things out. To my surprise, he started crying and broke down on the phone. He kept saying how sorry he was for everything that had happened. My mom was trying to hide her tears across the table, and I was feeling pretty emotional too. But I figured all three of us couldn't cry at the same time, so I tried to stay calm and kept talking. My dad told me he regretted how things turned out and that he never meant to hurt me. He admitted they both messed up and wanted to make it up to me. I told him I needed some time away to sort things out in my own head, but I was willing to give our relationship a chance. He said that even that was a big deal to him, and that he'd do anything to make things right. We had a brief talk and decided I would stay with them for at least a week and a half during the holidays, so we could spend some time together as a family. We also agreed to try family therapy, since there are definitely things we need to work through. My parents were already planning to start marriage counseling, and now my sister and I would join them in family therapy to help mend things. Since I'll be back at college after the break, we'll need to find someone who can do the sessions online, but we're committed to making this work. I don't want my family to fall apart and become one of those families who never speak to each other. So that's what happened when I met with my mom. I'm still processing everything we talked about, but I feel much better and more hopeful now. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that things will work out in the future. Update. It's been nearly a year since I last posted. I finally graduated, and the good news is I found a job just a few weeks after graduation. I'm working now, and I'm no longer miserable since I don't have to juggle studying too. I can focus on my work, come home to my apartment and my roommate, and just relax in the evenings. This is a nice life, and I could get used to it. I know many of you were curious about how things turned out with my parents, especially since some were skeptical about my decision to give them another chance. I'm happy to report that things have been going really well. We went through therapy together, and we've sorted things out. My grandparents kept their promise and covered my tuition for the last few months. My sister also decided to accept the financial help from our parents after I explained how difficult it was for me. To make it up to me, my parents offered to cover my rent for a few months until I've saved enough from my income. I think that's really nice of them, and it's sweet that they're trying to make amends. Things are great right now, and I don't have any complaints. Thank you so much for checking in.